In the summer of 1969, I joined with several others and traveled from Oklahoma to Iowa for a campaign for Christ. A campaign for Christ, whether you may not be familiar with that term, is an effort where for a certain period of time you go from door to door trying to set up Bible studies with people, teach them the gospel, and hopefully have several conversions to Christ. This campaign had its preparation some months in advance. There was training that had to be done. There was fundraising for the trip. And it was a very exciting time for me. It was basically, I think, my first time to be away from family for an extended period of time. It was my first time to travel to the state of Iowa. In fact, it may be the only time I've ever been to Iowa. But got to go to a new place, to the big city of Des Moines. And for 2 weeks, every day, I think we had a Saturday off. Every other day, we were engaged in worship, in knocking doors, and teaching Bible studies. And during that time, there were several who were baptized into Christ. It was a great experience. Then after the 2 weeks, we came home. In a similar way, it has been my privilege, and now that Debbie is retired, she gets to go with me. It's been our privilege to go to what we call lectureships. These are normally held at our Christian universities, and we've been to different ones over the years. We're hoping to go to one in Arkansas next month. But for just a few days, it's different than the normal everyday affair because you're hearing lesson after lesson, sermon after sermon. You're engaged in worship. There are hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people who are joining their voices together in song and worship to God. And it's just a great experience. And then you go home. Church camp is kind of that way. I think more so for the kids than for the staff members. But you have a period of about a week where you're with other young people who have values similar to yours, who are interested in Christ and in God. You have worship and Bible study several times each day during that week. When the end of camp comes, it's tough. Friendships have been renewed and made, Christian friendships, and then you go home. Last week we talked about mountaintops experiences, and there are mountaintop spiritual experiences. But after the experience, you have to go home. I'm sure you've had a mountaintop experience, spiritually speaking. And as we saw last week, 3 of the disciples of Jesus had the ultimate mountaintop experience. They were on a mountain when it happened, and they saw Jesus transfigured. They saw him there with Moses and Elijah. They heard the voice from the cloud, the voice of God say, "This is my son, listen to him." As Alan Black observes, the mountaintop experience is often followed by a strong reminder of the problems of life. That is the case in our text today, Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. When Jesus and the 3 disciples came back to the other disciples, they found them arguing with the teachers of the law after unsuccessfully attempting an exorcism. Read with me from Mark chapter 9, beginning with verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "O unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus. "Everything is possible for him who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive him out?" He replied, "This kind can only come out by prayer." They left that place. That's the end of our text, actually. Okay, here we have a scene. Jesus has been transfigured. Peter, James, and John were with him. They witnessed this great event. When they come back and to join the other disciples, there's a large crowd. They're around the disciples. It includes the teachers of the law, or the scribes. Seems they were always kind of around, watching Jesus, listening for Jesus to say something they could use against him. And they were having an argument. Now, when the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. Many of the people who are there know who Jesus is. They probably witnessed miracles that he's done already. They've heard him teach. And Jesus asked a question. He already knows the answer to this, I'm quite sure, since he knows the hearts of all men. But he asked the question, "Well, what are you arguing with them about?" Well, who's arguing with who? Well, you've got a crowd of people there. It includes the disciples. It includes the scribes. It includes others. But there's an argument going on. It seems to revolve around, why couldn't the disciples cast out this evil spirit from the boy? And we learn of that. When Jesus asks the question, "What are you arguing about?" a man in the crowd answers, and it happens to be the man at the center, really, of the story. "Teacher, I brought you my son. He is possessed by a spirit. It's robbed him of speech." So here we have a son. He cannot speak, but he also has other problems. This spirit throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, he becomes rigid. It describes basically what you have in an epileptic seizure. But this seizure, this condition, is caused by an evil spirit. That is clearly said. "I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." Now, was this a surprise? Well, yes, it was. Just a little while before, Jesus had given authority to the 12 that they could do his work, including casting out evil spirits. And they had done so. But on this particular occasion, they were unable to cast the evil spirit out of this boy. Well, what is the response of Jesus? He says, "Oh, unbelieving generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you?" Who's Jesus rebuking? Who's he saying is unbelieving? Well, perhaps the boy's father, as we shall see, we do see that he has an inadequate faith, perhaps. The scribes were always doubting Jesus. The disciples themselves, the 9 that were there, we find to be lacking. But Jesus says, "Bring him to me." The Father brings his son. Now, when the Spirit sees Jesus, that changes things rapidly. It threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Several years ago, I was substitute teaching in a particular school district, large high school. The substitute teacher is always at the mercy of the students. I was having problems, so I called for an assistant principal. This was a big school. It had more than one principal. This particular principal, who, by the way, is a Christian, he had the perfect look for a principal. He probably only smiled about 6 weeks into the school year, if even then. The moment he walked into the room, things changed. The students knew they better behave at that point. They could have used the substitute, but now they're in trouble. But there's a difference when Jesus shows up. This evil spirit sees Jesus and immediately reacts, throwing the boy into a convulsion. And so he falls to the ground, rolls around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus then asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" The father says, "From childhood." This spirit has often thrown him into fire or water in an effort to kill him. And then the father asks a question. Makes a request, actually. "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Now this father has brought this boy to Jesus. Jesus just didn't happen to be present when he first got there. This man has some faith. He has some confidence that Jesus could help his boy. But he's encountered the disciples. They weren't able to do anything. And so he says, "If you can." Now, if somebody says to us, "Can you help me?" or "If you can help me," well, we deserve that. There's limits to what we can do. We might put it forth to some circumstances we can think of. You know, people at a certain level in government can do certain things. People on up in government can do bigger things at times. If you can get to the right person and make your request there, you get some results that you might not get at the lower level. But the question is asked, and it shows a bit of doubt. If you can. If you can do something for us, well, do take pity on us and help us. And Jesus replies, "If you can." Jesus says everything is possible for him who believes. At that, the father immediately exclaims, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." I don't think in my life I have ever doubted the power of God. I have at times had a weak faith. And it's important to realize that it's not so much our faith in God, but our faith in a powerful God. Jesus is saying, if you have faith, anything can be done. And so the man says, "Help me overcome my unbelief." Well, a crowd is running. This has attracted attention. And so Jesus rebukes the evil spirit. He says, "You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him." And notice, and never enter him again. Don't come back. Well, at that, the spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. And the boy basically looked dead. People said, "He's dead." And Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. This father's faith had grown. It was growing. He had put his faith in the right person. Now Jesus went indoors. The disciples are with him. They asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive out this evil spirit?" And he replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer. What does that mean? The disciples had been given authority to cast out the unclean or the evil spirits. They've done so. It may be the situation that while Jesus is absent from them physically, that these disciples forget a bit just where their power to do these miracles comes from. They are relying perhaps on themselves and not upon God. They are not prayerful, not looking to God for strength in what they're doing. Only by prayer. We can at times do great things for the Lord. We should always be mindful that we can only do great things for the Lord because He enables us. And He should always receive the glory. Which one of us hasn't been in exactly the same situation as the Father that day? We believe, but we're not fully believing. We say, I know God can do what I'm asking. But is what I'm asking in line with His will? Can God or will God do this? Well, the answer, all of us, because our faith is always imperfect, have been in that Father's shoes. There's no contradiction with what James writes in his letter, chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. There he's speaking of a divided loyalty, the double-minded situation, the two-souled situation, literally. Not sure whether you're relying on God or not. But if we are relying on God, our faith may need to grow. It can always grow, can't it? As the Father here said, help my unbelief, we need to, at times, pray to God, help my lack of faith. Help me to grow in faith in you. We cry out to God as this Father did. It's a matter of faith seeking greater faith. And we should never be afraid of bringing our requests to God, no matter how weak our faith. One thing we can ask of God, help my unbelief, and God will.